The Song That Remembers, a Chopi-inspired sleep story. In the time when stories are songs and songs are memories, when the wooden keys of the timbila xylophones hold the voices of ancestors, there lived a young man named Zimba among the Chopi people, in the land where the warm Indian Ocean meets the coastal plains of Mozambique. Zimba lived in a village where the round houses with their peaked thatched roofs stood in harmony with the land, where children's laughter mixed with the sound of pounding grain, and where every evening, as the sun turned the sky to honey and gold, someone would begin to play the timbila. The timbila was not just an instrument to the Chopi, it was a keeper of history, a teacher of wisdom, a bridge between the living and those who had gone before. Each wooden key, carefully carved and tuned, could speak. Together, in the hands of skilled musicians, they could sing entire stories, could make you laugh or weep, could remind you who you were and where you came from. Zimba had been learning the timbila since he was old enough to hold the mallets, the soft-headed beaters that brought the wooden keys to life. His grandfather, Makasini, was a master musician, a composer of ngodo, the great orchestral performances that combined timbila orchestras, dancers, and singers into something that was more than music, more than dance, more than words alone could ever be. On this particular evening, as the day's heat began to ease and a gentle breeze came in from the ocean carrying the scent of salt and distant rain, Zimba sat outside his grandfather's house, practicing. His timbila was smaller than the great bass instruments, but it was his own, made by his grandfather's hands, each key precisely shaped to sing its note clearly. He was working on a phrase that had been troubling him, a sequence of notes that should flow like water but kept catching, stumbling, not quite right. His hands knew the pattern, but something was missing. The notes were correct, but they lacked something he couldn't name. Makasini emerged from the house, moving with the careful grace of someone who has lived many seasons. He settled onto a woven mat, his eyes gentle with the patience of a teacher who knows that understanding comes in its own time. "You are thinking too much, little one," he said, though Zimba was no longer little, had reached his full height, had participated in the ceremonies that marked his passage to manhood. "The notes are right," Zimba said, frustrated. "But they don't sing." "Ah," Makasini nodded, as if this explained everything. "That is because you are playing the notes, but you are not playing the story." Zimba set down his mallets and looked at his grandfather. "Tell me the story, then. Help me understand." Makasini smiled, the kind of smile that holds wisdom and mischief in equal measure. "Come. Walk with me. The timbila can wait, it has been patient for many generations, it can be patient a little longer." They walked through the village as the light continued to soften. People greeted them as they passed, a woman grinding cassava, her movements rhythmic and meditative, children playing a game with stones, young men repairing fishing nets, their hands moving with practiced skill. Everyone was preparing, in their own way, for the festival that would come with the full moon, 3 days hence. The festival would celebrate the harvest and honor the ancestors. There would be the great ngodo performance, with multiple timbila orchestras playing together, with dancers moving in perfect synchronization, with singers whose voices would carry the old stories and the new observations, the praise and the gentle criticism that kept the community balanced and true. Makasini led Zimba out of the village, along a path that wound through the coastal forest. The trees here were different from the deep rainforest, these were adapted to salt wind and sandy soil, their leaves dark green and glossy. Birds called from the branches, settling for the evening, and somewhere in the distance, Zimba could hear the gentle rhythm of waves meeting shore. They came to a place Zimba knew well, a clearing where several large trees stood, their branches spreading to create a natural shelter. This was a sacred place, where the Chopi came to speak with ancestors, to make offerings, to seek guidance. In the center of the clearing, nearly hidden by roots and time, stood several old timbila instruments. They had been there for as long as anyone could remember, gradually being reclaimed by the forest, their wooden keys weathered and silent, but still present, still holding their shape. "Your great-great-grandfather carved these," Makasini said quietly. "He was the greatest timbila master of his generation. People came from many villages to hear him play, to learn from him. His compositions are still played today, the words have changed, the commentary has been updated for new times, but the melodies remain." Zimba had heard this before, but he listened with fresh attention. Stories, he had learned, revealed different truths depending on when you heard them, who you were when the words reached your ears. "He used to come here," Makasini continued, "when he needed to compose something new, when he needed to remember something old. He said the ancestors spoke more clearly in this place, where the old instruments still stood, where the boundary between past and present was thin as morning mist." They sat on the ground near the ancient timbila. The clearing was peaceful, held by the circle of trees, touched by the last rays of sun filtering through the leaves. Zimba could hear insects beginning their evening songs, each species contributing its voice to the chorus. "You asked about the story and the music," Makasini said. "Every piece of music we play carries memory. When you play that phrase you were practicing, you are not just making sound, you are speaking the words of your ancestor who first composed those notes. You are carrying forward the breath of someone who lived many generations ago." He paused, letting the words settle like seeds into soil. "That particular phrase," he continued, "was first played by your great-great-grandfather to welcome his first child into the world. It speaks of joy, of continuity, of the hope that each generation carries for the next. When you play it thinking only of the notes, it is empty. When you play it remembering what it means, remembering all the times it has been played for all the children born into our families since then, it becomes alive." Zimba felt something shift in his understanding, like a door opening onto a room he hadn't known was there. "So when I play," he said slowly, "I am playing with all those who played before me? We are playing together?" "Yes," Makasini said simply. "This is why our music is never truly solo, even when one person plays alone. The ancestors play with us. The community plays with us. The future, the children not yet born who will learn these same melodies, they play with us too." They sat in comfortable silence as the light continued to fade. The clearing seemed to grow more present, more itself, in the gentle darkness. Zimba became aware of a feeling, not quite a sound, not quite a touch, but something in between. It was as if the air itself was humming, holding the memory of all the music that had ever been played here. "Close your eyes," Makasini said softly. "Listen not with your ears, but with your whole being. Let the ancestors show you what they wish to teach." Zimba closed his eyes. At first, there was just the ordinary sound of evening, birds, insects, wind and leaves, the distant ocean. But gradually, beneath and within those sounds, he began to hear something else. It was faint at first, like music heard from very far away. The sound of timbila, played by hands that had returned to earth long ago, but whose music still echoed in this place. He heard melodies he knew and melodies he had never heard before. He heard the laughter of children, the voices of singers, the sound of dancers' feet on packed earth. He heard his great-great-grandfather playing, the notes clear and joyful, full of skill and love. He heard generations of musicians learning, practicing, performing. He heard the mistakes and the triumphs, the innovations and the honoring of tradition. He heard it all as one continuous song, a river of music flowing from the deep past through the present and on into the unborn future. And within that river, he found the phrase he had been struggling with. But now he heard it not as isolated notes but as part of a larger melody, a conversation between different timbila, different voices, different moments in time all speaking together. He understood now that the slight hesitation he kept making, what he had thought was an error, was actually meant to be there. It was a space, a breath, a moment where the soloist paused to let the other musicians answer, even if those other musicians were memory and possibility rather than physical presence. The music he heard in the clearing was not made of sound alone, but of meaning, of connection, of the invisible threads that linked generation to generation. Every note carried the weight and lightness of all who had played it before, all who would play it again. Zimba didn't know how long he sat there, listening to the music of memory. Time moved differently in this place, measured not in moments but in the slow accumulation of understanding. Eventually, the music faded, or perhaps he simply returned fully to the ordinary world. He opened his eyes to find that night had fallen completely. The stars were emerging overhead, and a half-moon was rising through the trees, painting everything in silver and shadow. "You heard them," Makasini said, not a question, but an acknowledgement. "Yes," Zimba breathed. "I heard." "Good. This is the teaching that cannot be spoken, only experienced. Now you know that when you play, you are never alone. The timbila keys are not just wood, they are the voices of ancestors, shaped by their hands, animated by their breath, still speaking to us across the years." They rose and began the walk back to the village. Zimba felt different, lighter somehow, as if a burden he hadn't known he was carrying had been lifted. The path seemed clearer, even in the darkness, as if he could sense the footsteps of all those who had walked it before him. As they approached the village, they heard music. Someone was playing timbila, the notes floating through the night air like fireflies. Other instruments joined, the deep bass notes, the middle range, the high singing keys. Then voices, singing words in the old style, telling a story, praising the harvest, gently teasing someone who had been lazy in their work, making everyone laugh. This was the informal music making that happened most evenings, different from the great formal Ngodo performances, but no less important. This was how the community spoke to itself, reminded itself of its values, corrected itself with humor rather than harshness, celebrated its joys and acknowledged its sorrows. Zimba and his grandfather joined the circle of musicians and listeners. Zimba picked up his mallets, and when the moment felt right, he began to play. He played the phrase that had troubled him, but now it flowed like water, like breath, like the natural thing it had always been meant to be. The other musicians heard the change and responded, their instruments speaking with his in the ancient conversation of the timbila orchestra. The music wove together, each player contributing their voice while listening carefully to all the others, creating something that was greater than the sum of its parts. Zimba played with his grandfather, with the other musicians around the circle, but he also played with those who were not visibly present, the ancestors whose hands had shaped this music, whose spirits still moved within it. He played for the children who watched and listened, learning with their whole bodies how music should sound, how it should feel. He played for the community that surrounded him, that held him, that had given him this gift of music and memory. The songs continued late into the night. Some were old, passed down for countless generations with only minor changes. Others were new, composed just days before, responding to recent events, a marriage, a successful hunt, a dispute resolved, a child born. The timbila spoke of all of it, preserving it, transforming it into art. Between songs, people talked and laughed. Children dozed against their parents' sides. Elders told stories that blended into the music, so you couldn't quite tell where speech ended and song began. This was the oral tradition alive, the living transmission of knowledge and culture from one generation to the next. As the night grew late and the music finally began to wind down, people drifted toward their homes. Zimba helped his grandfather pack away the timbila, wrapping it carefully in cloth, treating it with the respect due to a sacred object. "You will compose your own music one day," Makasini said as they walked to his house. "You will add your voice to the long conversation. And when you do, you will draw on everything you have learned, everything you have heard, everything the ancestors have taught you. Your compositions will honor the past while speaking to the present." "I hope I can be worthy of that responsibility," Zimba said. "You already are," his grandfather replied. "The fact that you ask the question shows you understand what it means to carry this tradition forward." Zimba lay down that night in his house, listening to the sounds of the village settling into sleep. Through the walls, he could hear gentle breathing, the soft movements of people arranging themselves comfortably, a baby being soothed by its mother's lullaby. He thought about the music he had heard in the sacred clearing, the voices of ancestors still singing. He thought about the timbila keys, carved by hands that had long since returned to earth, still making music, still teaching, still connecting the past to the present to the future. He understood now that he was part of something vast and continuous. Each time he played, he added his breath to the long breath of his people. Each time he learned a song, he became a link in a chain stretching back to the beginning and forward to the end. The thought was humbling and empowering at once. He was small, one person, one life, one set of hands on the timbila. But he was also part of something immense, a tradition, a community, a culture that had endured for countless generations and would continue for countless more. He drifted towards sleep with a melody running through his mind, the phrase he had finally mastered, but heard now in its fullness, with all its harmonies and echoes, all its connections to past and future. In his dreams, he played timbila in the sacred clearing, surrounded by ancestors who nodded with approval, their faces shifting and changing, sometimes familiar, sometimes strange, but always recognizing him as one of their own. He dreamed of the festival to come, the great Ngodo performance where orchestras of timbila would play together, where dancers would move in patterns passed down through generations, where singers would tell stories both ancient and new, where the community would gather to remember who they were and who they wished to become. He dreamed of music as a river, flowing endlessly, carrying memory and meaning, never the same in any two moments but always recognizably itself. And he was part of that river, adding his drops to the eternal flow. The night deepened around the village. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The ocean breathed against the shore, patient and rhythmic. And in the sacred clearing, the old timbila instruments stood their eternal watch, weathered by time but not defeated by it, still holding within their wooden keys the songs they had been carved to sing. Zimba slept the deep sleep of someone who has found their place in the world, who knows they belong to something larger than themselves. He slept cradled by community, held by tradition, surrounded by the invisible but palpable presence of ancestors who wished only to see their children thrive and remember. And in the morning, he would wake and practice again, but differently now, not as someone struggling alone but as someone joining a conversation that had been going on for generations, adding his voice to the chorus, learning to speak in the language of wood and rhythm and memory. The timbila would sing. The community would listen. The ancestors would smile. And the tradition would continue, alive and adaptive, honoring the past while embracing the present, carrying forward the wisdom that music is not just sound but story, not just performance but preservation, not just art but the very breath of a people. All was well in the village of the Chopi. All was as it should be. The music continued, even in silence. The songs remembered, even when no one was singing. The ancestors watched, even in sleep. And the timbila keys, carved with love and skill and patience, waited to sing again when the morning came.